In this video, I'm going to try and break down the reasons why Ian Garry should get the title shot over Kamaru Usman. Now, obviously, there needs to be some type of criteria to get a title shot. I feel the main thing that should get you a title shot is your recent win. This is Ian Garry's last 5 fights. Jeff Neal was 2-2 before fighting Ian Garry. The fight before, he got finished by Shavkat, and that was a somewhat competitive fight until it wasn't. And it was Ian Garry's first real test in his career. Ian Garry's next win is Michael Page, who in the UFC has only lost to Ian Garry and has pretty much dominated everyone else he's fought, even fighting at middleweight twice. Then he loses to Shavkat in a pretty close fight that he took on 21 days notice, which is also part of the criteria. Shavkat won 3 rounds to 2. That fight really showed people that Ian Garry deserves to be at the top level. The most notable wins for Shavkat before the Ian Garry fight was Wonderboy and Jeff Neal, and he finished them both. Ian Garry is the only person in Shavkat's career that he took to a decision. Then he goes and beats Carlos Prates, and he pretty much dominated him for 4.5 rounds. Another fight Ian Garry took on 2 to 3 weeks notice, but he did almost get finished. And as I think most people know, Carlos Prates has finished everyone in the UFC that he's fought other than Ian Garry, and he's made pretty much every single person he's fought look easy. Ian Garry's next fight was with Belal Muhammad, who was the number 2 contender at that time. Belal's fight before the Ian Garry fight was a title fight which he lost. In my opinion, Ian Garry's performance in the Belal fight wasn't his best. He could have done a lot more offensively, but in the end, I think it was a clear win for him. Now let's go back to the criteria. In Ian Garry's last 5 fights, he went 4-1 between the years 2024 and 2025. That shows that he was very active. Even fighting top contenders, he was still active. He took 2 short notice fights within them 5 fights, and they were both against his 2 most dangerous opponents that he has fought. Now we go to the performances. Now obviously rating his performances is opinion based, but I tried my best considering the opponent and considering the opponent's last few fights. The Jeff Neal fight, I gave Ian Garry a 6 out of 10. Jeff Neal seems to do really good against people who don't punch that hard, and I don't think Ian Garry, with his hands specifically, punches that hard. So I feel it was a difficult stylistic matchup for Ian Garry, but I think for most people it was clear that Ian Garry won rounds 2 and 3. Now the Michael Page fight could really be an 8 or a 9 because MVP is very underrated in my opinion. Obviously his grappling isn't that good, and that's what Ian Garry won the fight at, but it's hard for me to see people outstrike MVP in the UFC. I think this is also the first fight where Ian Garry showed he is an MMA fighter and not just a striker. I think for most people it was clear that Ian Garry won rounds 1 and 3. The reason the Shavkat fight in my opinion is a 7 out of 10 is because of how big an underdog Ian Garry was in that fight. Every person I saw talking about that fight thought Ian Garry was going to get finished pretty easily. They said he's too weak, he doesn't really have the skills or the experience. Shavkat's finished everyone, and to be honest, I don't blame them. A lot of people even thought Shavkat was another one of these really dominant guys on the ground. But in this fight, Ian Garry showed most people that he really is that good. But in terms of rating the performance, I could definitely see people putting it lower than a 7, just because as a performance, it was not that good from Ian Garry. He seemed very hesitant to throw on the feet, and he was definitely too patient. And in my opinion, that's the only reason Shavkat won that fight. I think if Ian Garry was a little bit more active and less hesitant, he would have easily won the fight. The Carlos Prates performance could easily have been a 9 if he didn't almost get finished. He was simply outstriking Carlos Prates for 4.5 rounds until the end of the 4th round, where he starts to visibly tire out, especially once he starts trying to wrestle. It seems like the wrestling was not good for Ian Garry because his arms started to tire out, which made defending punches and even kicks a lot harder. There was a moment in I think the 5th round or the end of the 4th round where it really looked like Carlos was going to finish him, but I don't know if Carlos just started really getting tired or it was just bad instinct from him, but he just stopped throwing punches when Ian Garry was 3 or 4 punches away from being finished. Most people gave Ian Garry rounds 1 to 4 and Prates the 5th. Ian Garry then fought Belal Muhammad, who was coming off of a loss against JDM. Before the JDM fight, Belal was on a 10-fight win streak, but Ian Garry's performance against Belal wasn't anything special. It seemed like he won wanted to do as little as possible but still get a win. And even though he won the fight dominantly, I personally don't really like the performance that he put on. And I also don't think Belal is that good of a fighter either. The only round in that fight you could have given Belal is the second round. Two of the judges scored it 30-27, the other one had it 29-28. So I think I've covered everything I can for Ian Garry. Now let's move on to Kamaru Usman. This is Kamaru Usman's last 5 fights, and I'm going to go through all of his wins just like I did with Ian Garry's. This is the win streak Colby Covington was on before fighting Kamaru Usman. Colby Covington was Kim's last fight in his career. Damian Maia had just lost to Woodley the fight before fighting Covington. Before that, he beat Masvidal and Carlos Condit. RDA was on a 3-fight win streak and he beat Neil Magny and Robbie Lawler. And Robbie Lawler was on a 2-fight losing streak. Kamaru Usman's next opponent was Leon Edwards. This is the win streak Leon Edwards was in before fighting Kamaru Usman. Gunnar Nelson was on a 1-fight win streak. The fight before, which he lost, he got knocked out in. RDA was also on a 1-fight win streak. Before that, losing twice in a row to Usman and Covington. Nate Diaz was on a 1-fight losing streak and hadn't fought in 68 months. Usman's next fight was the rematch with Leon Edwards in a fight that he got dominated in. The only reason it was a majority decision is because of point deductions. Usman then fights Khamzat Chimaev on 11 days notice upper weight class. This is the win streak Chimaev was on before fighting Usman. Jing Liang was on a 1-fight win streak. Gilbert Burns was also on a 1-fight win streak, beating Wonderboy. Kevin Holland was on a 2-fight win streak, beating Tim Means and Alex Oliveira. Usman then fought Buckley, who at the time was on a pretty good run at welterweight. He beat Vicente Luque, who was on a 1-fight win streak, before that losing to Belal and Jeff Neal. He then beat Rul Zaboyev, who was on a 2-fight winning streak in the UFC, whose only fight at welterweight is the fight with Buckley. Buckley then beats Wonderboy, who was on a 1-fight losing streak, which he lost by finish, and it was against Shavkat Rakhmonov. Buckley then beats Colby Covington. Colby Covington was on a 1-fight losing streak against Leon Edwards, and at that point in his career was extremely inactive. Alright, so now we're back at the criteria. Usman is 2-3 in his last 5 fights between 2021 and 2025, showing that he was not that active, and he took 1 fight on short notice. Now I'm gonna rate the performances that Usman had throughout them 5 fights. Colby Covington's fight was an all-around good fight. Usman seemed to dominate the fight early, having a really dominant second round, dropping Colby twice, but Colby bounced back and kind of made the rest of the fight competitive. But for most people, it was clear that Usman won the fight. I think the most popular opinion is that Usman won 48-47. Now the first Leon Edwards fight is a bit of a tricky one. If Usman wasn't to get knocked out and was to win a decision, it would be an 8, maybe even a 9. I think the only round you could really give Leon is the first round, and then Usman dominated from the second round on. I feel the only really bad thing throughout the whole fight for Usman was that he couldn't really hurt Leon that much. Leon looked like a zombie. He wasn't really doing much. His activity was low. He looked tired, and he was kind of just backing up and respecting everything Usman was throwing, and still Usman couldn't really hurt him. The Leon Edwards rematch was pretty bad from Usman. He seemed very rusty. He couldn't really take Leon down that well. Usman seemed to get wobbled by a knee a little bit, and it's probably Usman's worst performance in his whole career. The Khamzat Chimaev performance was pretty surprising from Usman, considering the last Leon Edwards fight and the fact that he was moving up in weight on 10 to 11 days notice against Khamzat Chimaev, who at the time was probably the best prospect in the sport, and the fight was really competitive. The second and third round were really competitive rounds. A lot of people I saw thought the fight could have been a draw. The first round at 10-8 and Usman won 2-3, but most people believe Chimaev should have won the fight. The first round was extremely dominant for Chimaev. He was on Usman's back for I'm pretty sure the whole round, so considering the circumstances, I think it was a pretty good performance from Usman. The Buckley performance was definitely Usman's safest performance. He actually used his wrestling against someone for the first time in I don't know how many fights, and pretty much just dominated Buckley on the ground. He didn't really throw much on the feet. He didn't want to take too much risk, which is a smart but also safe game plan from Usman. He was kind of taking Buckley down at will, it seemed, and just controlling him, but it was a really just safe performance because he wanted to get that win. Now this video is about done, but just a little bit of summary before we end the video. Now these are their last 5 fights put side by side. In my opinion, the Carlos Prates that fought Ian Garry is better than the Leon Edwards and Buckley that fought Usman. Usman's best win out of them 5 is Colby Covington in 2021. If you look at Colby Covington's resume throughout his whole whole career, he hasn't really beat that many good fighters. I don't think the Buckley win is as good as some people tend to make it out to be. He beat an old Wonder Boy and an old Colby Covington who hadn't fought in over a year. The only other argument that people make is that Usman is a former dominant champion and that he took the Chimaev fight on short notice, upper weight class. That is the only other argument people have. Now, the Chimaev thing is a good argument, but Ian Garry took 2 short notice fights as well, one against Shavkat and one against Bratches. And the former dominant champion argument is dumb. Usman got his rematch for the title and then he got a big opportunity at middleweight and he lost both times. In my opinion, Usman should fight Michael Morales or Carlos Bratches and then he would deserve a title shot. And I'll leave you with this picture.